Hello, welcome to From Caracas. I'm Laura Prada. In this opportunity, we'll be talking with Carlos Rom, who is Deputy Minister for North America in the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry. Today, we'll be talking about Venezuela, about the blockade imposed to the country by United States, and all those aggressions that are affecting not only the government, but mainly, and of course, the people of Venezuela. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you very much.
What are those actions that have been suffering in the recent time Venezuelan people and the government imposed by the United States government?
Well, currently we're under blockade, and that's the most important action against the people of Venezuela, because the United States government claims that they're doing something against specific politicians or specific leaders of the Venezuelan revolution, but in reality, every measure that has been taken, coercive measures, which they call sanctions, against Venezuela have had a huge impact on the average population. We're facing a vast financial blockade, which leaves us without the ability that we used to have to purchase food, to purchase medicine, to purchase supplies for technology, for development of agriculture or other normal day activities. And this has led to a strain on the Venezuelan population that has seen in the last couple of years real affectations on its ability to purchase basic necessities. So we're facing a blockade that's also in the financial sphere, where at least $6 billion have been frozen or have been stopped in some of the transactions. And this is money that is from the Venezuelan state that is used for these basic necessities, and we're now unable to use it.
But in the past years, we can say the last 3 years, Venezuela have been through many aggressive actions coming from United States. It is said that at least 150 sanctions have been imposed to the country. We've seen in the recent months an attempt of coup d'etat. We also have seen in August last year the drone explosions at a military parade that tried to kill President Nicolas Maduro. We've seen, and like that I can keep counting many actions. But who are those who are suffering these actions coming from the United States? And are all of these actions ever seen before applied to a country in such short time?
Oh, I think there has been a viciousness with regards to Venezuela. I mean, there's a clear plan at the end of the day to promote what they call regime change, change of government by force, because the opposition, the people that they've supported all along here in Venezuela, they haven't been able to reach government by normal democratic means. So there's a explicit purpose of hurting the Venezuelan government, its ability to carry out its functions, so that in turn this will make the people of Venezuela either turn against the government or have the military turn against the government. That's the purpose. At the end of the day, what we see is the resilience of the Venezuelan people. In spite of all these attacks, they have been, like you said, in a very short period of time. I think the importance of that is that there's a time frame. There's a timeline that they need to comply with. There's elections next year in the United States, and Venezuela is an internal issue in the United States. It's not just an international issue.
How has Venezuela become an internal issue of the United States?
Well, because you have now a significant population in the state of Florida, for example, and in other regions as well, but mainly in the state of Florida, where you have an average of about 100 to 200,000 Venezuelan Americans that can vote. And if you look at the last elections in Florida regarding like state elections, the difference between the Senate race or the governor race was of about 10, 15,000 votes. So if you have a mass of 100,000 voters, it's significant and could turn an election either way. And Florida is a key state for for any presidential candidate in the United States to be able to succeed. So I think it plays into that local politics, and it also plays into the fact that in this particular election, the main candidates that are competing against President Trump, Bernie Sanders, you have Elizabeth Warren, you have a whole series of candidates who are not so hostile to the idea of socialism or to something that, some policies that are promoted here that we have defended, like free public education, free health care. So Trump's defense then becomes, well, we have to attack the model, we have to attack socialism. So where can we attack where it might seem for the American people this is a bad idea? Well, we attack Venezuela because we can sanction Venezuela, we could put pressure on Venezuela, make its economy hurt in some way, and then show this as a failed system. So it's part of, the whole thing is part of the internal policies of the United States. I mean, of what's going to happen in the next year's election. So they need to somehow put pressure on the Venezuelan people, put pressure on the government, so that they have a good story to tell for the Trump campaign, and they can proceed to also change the government here.
If Venezuela has become part of United States domestic policy, as we can see and we can conclude after seeing how they are acting, we can understand also that it's not only Venezuela, it's also the rest of Latin America that is in danger of these attacks. Why?
Sure, because I think there's an issue of the model. For many years, the United States was looking away from the region. It was interested in building its presence in the Pacific, in the Asia region during the Obama administration. And now there's a return to a need of controlling the Western Hemisphere. They realized that while they looked away, popular movements started getting control, and there's different policies being implemented. The Washington Consensus was rejected basically in most of the countries. So they needed some way to come back, and they need to strike Venezuela hardest because they know Venezuela has opened the way to many of the of the regional integration models, to many of the popular movements have been inspired or find some sort of they share some ideas with the Venezuelan revolution, so they need to put more pressure on Venezuela so that they can regain that control.
We've seen after this recent act that Venezuela has become part of United States domestic policies. But why United States is so afraid of these progressive movements taking control, taking power of their countries, of their people, of being concerned about how the people have better access to health, to education, to food? Why is the concern of not letting them having all of those goods that helps them?
I think there's an issue about a model that they were projecting for many years, and that these countries having a progressive governments started taking a new approach and doing things independently and cutting back their dependence in the United States and being able to forge alliances within their own region that strengthen their own cases. So within Latin America, there was definitely a break with that dependency on the United States, and at the same time, I think they're afraid of what it could imply for the United States in regards to a model that people in the U.S. might want to follow. Because people in the United States sometimes are surprised when they go to Venezuela, when they go to Cuba, and they see there's free health care, there's free education. You don't have to spend all your life, your adult life, paying off a debt that otherwise you couldn't have paid. So these are things that go against the financial system in the United States. They go against the health insurance companies. There's a lot of interest that want to maintain the system as is, and that they don't want to open to an alternative. So I think they need to attack the alternatives. They need to attack Venezuela in the sense that it's one of the key places that has a strong presence and a strong leadership in this area, so that they could the model can survive.
We've seen in the last year, you yourself have been at the post of deputy minister in the last year, how these aggressions against Venezuela have intensified to the point that they are today. In our minds, in our eyes, we still have recent the thoughts and the images of the aggression, of the invasion of the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. We've seen how protests, they took out light service, also water service, and even stopping food to enter to the people that were there and had the nuance of the Venezuelan government. What can we expect now that happens in the world? Because there were laws that were broken, international conventions that have been agreed upon for years. What can we expect now?
Well, I think what we've seen in the embassy, what took place in our former embassy building, was basically the same micro-reproduction of the same blockade that's going on here in Venezuela. And it's basically an attempt to change the political reality of Venezuela without the consent of the Venezuelan people. So you basically, the United States placed or opened the door to self-proclaimed ambassador. In the same way here they have supported a so-called self-proclaimed president. They want to impose their will in that sense, and to do so they don't care if they affect any type of population. They don't care if they cut off the water, if they cut off the electricity. I mean, this is part of that vicious unrefrained attack when you have to fulfill a purpose. This is a terrible precedent for international law. I mean, they violated the Vienna Convention. I mean, Article 45 of the Vienna Convention explicitly says that even if there's a break in diplomatic relations between two countries, there's the premises of the diplomatic mission has to be respected and it can't be violated. And what we saw was the violation of having U.S. authorities come inside the building. You had the violation of Venezuelan opposition supporters in Washington, block the entrances, like you said, attack the people that were defending the embassy. And by the way, and that's also an important fact, which is something that I think is definitely unprecedented, is the fact that there was a group of U.S. citizens that were very concerned about this issue and that came forth to defend international law, to say we don't agree with what our government is doing, we don't agree with what our government is going to take us if they attack Venezuela, if they attack Venezuela's embassy. This might lead to a conflict, to a war. We don't want to see any more wars. And we want to make sure that the American public knows that we really defend international law and Venezuelan sovereignty.
You're talking about the Protection Collective.
Yes, the Embassy Protection Collective, which were people that decided on their own will that they wanted to do this. They wanted to take this stand. And they did it in solidarity with us because they saw that we lost to these opposition groups. They handed over 2 of the former military attaché buildings. They handed over the Consulate General in New York. And they were afraid that what would mean if the embassy was also handed over. So they went out of their way to protect the embassy, and they faced attacks. The most vicious, I think the most vicious elements of the Venezuelan right wing were present unfortunately in Washington. You saw attacks on physical attacks. You saw insults of the worst kinds, racist insults and so forth. And it was, again, the example of the craziness of that group of extreme right-wing people that are trying to come to power here in Venezuela as well. So, but we should see that as a very important, I think, break in history, because I think it is the first time that Americans come out and defend international law and support in their own country, support a country that's being attacked by the United States. And I think it's a great show of solidarity, and that's something we have to thank them for. And we have to consider that it really shows the spirit, the real spirit of the American people, not the one of its governments, which is one of aggression, but one of solidarity from its people.
Of course. And we've seen also in the last months, the news have been telling about the confiscation of goods and capital of the Venezuelan government, as you were saying before. But also those economic sanctions. How has the Venezuelan government reacted? Does this has to do anything about this campaign that has been just launched to make the world understand what are the consequences of these sanctions, of this blockade applied to Venezuela?
Sure, we faced a strong financial blockade. We faced, like you said, the taken over, basically theft of our company in the U.S., which was Citgo. They handed over without breaching all types of legal processes. They handed over the company to these opposition groups, and basically stopped. That has blocked payments. For example, Citgo made important payments to foundation that would help treat children with and adults also.
Indeed, I was going to ask you about that because we've seen recently that the Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza have been tweeting about the cases of children who have died due to this theft of funds.
Well, this is the interesting thing when we think about why they're attacking the model. I mean, one of the things that the revolution has created was a commitment to helping people out and to really, seeing that people have, their health care seen to, and that they have access to this. And there was a foundation established by PDVSA where they would channel funds so that people can get this treatment, some, very specific technical treatment that's not granted here, that's not given here in Venezuela, but it is specifically given in Italy, where they have the technology. And it was very successful, and has been a very successful program because there's a willingness to help these people out. Now, this all comes into risk when they confiscate Citgo, and when Citgo now doesn't give the payments to do so, and where PDVSA tries to make a payment from another source, and then it's blocked by the financial blockade. So you really are putting now the risk, to the rest of the Venezuelan people, where their needs, basic needs that before used to be covered by the revolution. So it's not, when we talk about when President Trump and when they bring this up in their debates and campaigns, they talk about the failure of socialism. Actually, socialism here in Venezuela was doing very well, and we had a lot of achievements that we can prove it. But if you confiscate the source of money, if you block the transactions, then of course something's going to fail. But it's not the program, it's not the principle, it's the actions from the United States against the Venezuelan people.
As you were saying, is a theft, is an aggression and a persecution also of those assets that the Venezuelan government uses to reinforce, to provide goods to the people. But
and by the way, this is not new, because we've seen this happen in Iraq, because there was this sham program called Oil for Food, where they started taking basically Iraq's oil and disposing it, and then putting the money to whoever they wanted to put in that country. And there's similar actions that were taken against Libya as well. So this is part of the pattern of when there's an attempt to reconquer a territory that they claim or they see as belonging to them. This is the pattern they do, so they could break down, a government that is successful and pretty much put their place in their place whoever their allies are.
How has diplomacy, the role of diplomacy, the Venezuelan diplomacy, in this case of telling the world, of explaining the rest of the world what is happening in Venezuela?
Well, it's difficult because you are faced with aggression, you have to respond with diplomacy. And, they usually say that they have all the options on the table, but when you see the options they employ, they never look for diplomacy as an option. They use the aggressions. We are real believers in diplomacy. What we've done is that we still maintain our position. We still maintain our openness to dialogue with the United States, to talk about any of the issues that we must address, but we have to do this on a level, an equal field, and with a level of respect. And what we're going to do, and what we keep doing, is denouncing this in all international, within the international community, within the multilateral organizations, within the United Nations, making sure that everybody knows that this is a breach of international law, and that we really are in defending, our principles. Here in Venezuela, for example, the former U.S. embassy has not been touched. I mean, is well taken care of by Venezuelan authorities. There has been no breach. In Washington, they broke our security cameras, they broke our windows, all these things. Here, they're very well protected because we're respectful of international law. And despite the fact that they are violating the law, we're here, keeping it up. I think that's the principle which we should stand for. And we'll take all actions that we need to take within international legal fields so that we can defend Venezuela's sovereignty.
Thank you, Carlos, for being here. Like this, we come to the end of this From Caracas that we've been talking with Carlos Rom, Deputy Minister for North America at the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry. With him, we spoke about the current situation in Venezuela caused by the economic sanctions and the financial blockade imposed from the United States to Venezuela. Like this, we come to the end.